This is a WDIV production.
We would like to make a request to the people in Birmingham. We have information that several youngsters were seen playing around the Chatham parking lot on the night that Timmy disappeared. We'd like to have these persons call the Birmingham Police Department and give us any information they can.
Not only was the public nervous, frightened, scared to death about what was happening to our children, but you had some doubts creeping in to the public as to whether the police were doing a good job.
Sergeant Crease, are you taking any special preparations to catch this guy if he strikes again? His attacks have become more and more frequent, December, January, and now March. Have you got a trap set?
I'm certainly not going to comment on this, but as far as the local police departments, I think they've geared up and are more aware.
This is where the youngster was last seen leaving at 8:30 Wednesday night. And authorities are saying that somebody must have seen something that evening, and they're asking people to come forward.
To those persons or person who may be with Tim, I don't know if you have children or if you want to have some, but please treat Tim the same way you would your own kid.
The clock was ticking, and you knew that these kids were going through something horrible.
My family and the world were cheated when that happened.
I mean, there's lots of names you could give this case. The kids, it was unusual because they were held for several days. There's a snow killer, the babysitter killer, there's lots of different names.
She claimed she saw Tim talking next to a man, and they were standing next to a gremlin. It was a blue gremlin with a white hockey stripe.
With the amount of coverage that we had to know that we had assembled probably the largest task force in the United States to work on a case like this. And I'm sure that the pressure caused him to move to Wayne County.
I'm convinced to this day that when Timmy was kidnapped, he knew what was going to happen to him.
Tim was abducted on March 16, 1977, sexually abused, and suffocated on March 22nd.
So now police know they have a serial child killer on their hands, and they organize the largest manhunt in U.S. history at the time. They create a task force and set up shop in an abandoned school, elementary school.
All of these cases, of course, similar, children abducted and murdered, But the police and the public did not put all the pieces together yet, because there were differences between between each case, different enough that we just couldn't connect all the dots. But when Timothy King was found murdered, things became very clear.
Timmy King, who lives in Birmingham, who was well schooled by his parents about what was going on, and asked Kathy, his older sister. His parents had gone to Peabody's, which was a restaurant that was kitty corner from the shopping complex where Tim disappeared. Barry and Marion were with a client having dinner there.
His sister Kathy had given him some change to go down to the corner store, Hunter Maple Pharmacy, to get some candy.
Kathy was on her way to go see Jerry Lewis in concert downtown.
Mark had a babysitting job that night.
The other was working on a school play at high school.
Mark had the lead in the 9th grade play up here, and they wanted him to come up for that, so Chris went to babysit, and so...
Tim asked Kathy if he could go up to Hunter Maple Pharmacy, which is a block and a half away. She gave him 30 cents. He didn't want to use his own money because he was saving up for a light blue running tracksuit.
He was 11 or 12 years old, took his skateboard, went down the street.
And was never seen again.
That's the last time the family had ever seen him.
Age 11, 4 feet, 63 pounds, hair brown, eyes brown, living at Yorkshire, City of Birmingham, 3400. This is KHJU Portable 8. The time is 11:31 hours.
For an hour or so, Tim was alone at the house, and we were just quite surprised when we got here that he wasn't here. But I don't feel bad about taking Marion out to dinner. I don't feel bad about the other kids going where they went. So I wouldn't have made any decisions the other way.
The key to Timothy King's disappearance is still the rear door here at the Hunter Maple Pharmacy. This is where the youngster was last seen leaving at 8:30 Wednesday night. And authorities are saying that somebody must have seen something that evening, and they're asking people to come forward.
A woman saw him come out and saw him in the parking lot and saw him by a car that was driven by a man.
When he disappeared, the Birmingham Police Department was contacted. They came out and they interviewed the family. Chris King, who was his brother, for example, said that a couple of hours after he discovered his brother gone, he started searching the neighborhood.
Chris went with his mom to drive around the neighborhood to all the friends' houses. And finally they drive up to the last friend's house and the lights weren't on. And Chris said, "Do you want me to go in, Mom?" And she said, "No, he's not there." And then she started to cry, and Chris said, "That was horrible, because by then you knew the clock was ticking." One of the most tragic things I think about this case, and I'll get back to Tim, is the fear and panic was so pervasive that once a kid was snatched, all you could think about was the unthinkable, what was going on, and while you dreaded going to the mailbox and picking up the newspaper for fear of seeing a blazing headline that said "Body Found," at the same time, the clock was ticking and you knew that these kids were going through something horrible.
The family of Timothy King went public and begged the killer to let their child live and to release Tim.
Somebody from television came to me, and I just thought I was talking to Tim.
Well, I want to say hi to Tim. We love you, Tim. God bless you. Stay tough. I have one other statement to those persons or person who may be with Tim. I don't know if you have children or if you want to have some, but please treat Tim the same way you would your own kid. Talk to him. He's a talkative kid if you've spent some time with him.
I don't remember whether that was my idea or somebody else's, but I just wanted Tim to know we wanted him back.
Chris, that night, you know, big brother, all of 16 years old, is going to go in and venge and find his brother, and he grabs his baseball bat and he walks up to Hunter Maple Pharmacy in the Chatham Market parking lot, and he sees several cars, and he checks each one. And one of those cars was a Gremlin, and he knew there was a Gremlin and remembered that there was a Gremlin because he was a fan of that car. They had Levi upholstery, you know, jean upholstery. So he goes home, and Kathy comes home from the concert, and Kathy was kind of their last hope. And then they ended up calling the police. I shop at that grocery store every day. You know, I'm up there every day for the last 25 years.
We have information that several youngsters were seen playing around the Chatham parking lot on the night that Timmy disappeared. We'd like to have these persons call the Birmingham Police Department and give us any information they can about what they saw when they...
You have reason to believe that these youngsters saw Timmy King that night?
We know they were in the parking lot, and we're hoping that they possibly did see him.
So there are helicopters taking on and off from Poppleton Park. Traffic lines started to form in neighborhood streets throughout the county because it was school dismissal time, and no parent wanted to let their kid walk home alone. The police department in some jurisdictions started fingerprinting kids just in case.
He was a very popular kid. He was the smallest kid on the baseball team and was a leadoff hitter. Went 2 for 2 in the All-Star game. He wasn't a superior student, but he got A's and B's through the 6th grade, and he knew everybody. He was very sociable, and my family and the world were cheated when that happened.
You want me just to give a general statement, or you want to ask the questions?
General statement.
Okay. All right. The Birmingham Police Department received a report from a King family in the city of Birmingham that their youngest son, Timothy King, had not returned home. Timothy is 11 years old, and this report came in at midnight. We have an extensive search in the Birmingham area. We have utilized both the sheriff's office, and we have also the task force that is presently working on the other crimes that have committed in the Oakland County area in our station and working at this time.
How many officers is that, Chief?
I would say that right now there are probably, as we get to noon, there will probably be close to 100 officers involved right now.
Are there similarities? Got much valuable experience from the other crimes?
Yes,
crimes in Oakland County?
we have. I want to, it's a little premature at this time to
they were right on top of it.
Has the youngster had a discipline problem?
No.
Could this be a kidnapping or runaway?
We don't believe it would be a kidnapping or a runaway. I would say that, again, we would not want to jump to some conclusions at this time. We want to remain optimistic at this point.
The King's address is on Yorkshire. How
That's
close
correct.
is that to the location where Sheila Schrock, the babysitter, was murdered just over a year ago?
It's very close.
3 blocks.
I would say 3 to 4 blocks.
Similarities between Schrock and...
No, there are no similarities between the Schrock murder and the missing youngster here we have on Yorkshire.
Where was the jacket found?
This jacket was not found. This is a jacket that's similar to the one that Tim was wearing.
How far is the drugstore from the youngster's home?
About 3 blocks.
He had not had a fight with his family.
No fight with the family, no reason to leave home.
Well, it was late at night when we finally called the cops, but I had deep suspicions that he was in the situation that he was at, and that went on for 6 days. I was very pleased that almost from dawn to 10 o'clock at night, people were at this house to console my family, and that's the part I remember the most. I didn't know I had that many friends. But I anticipated that what was going to happen happened.
This street will be closed until probably sometime late this afternoon to allow the crime lab people to do the thorough job that we have asked of them. Tentatively, the body of the young lad down there is Timothy King. There will be a news conference probably at 9 o'clock this morning. Birmingham Police Department. Same location we've held other interviews and news releases.
What do you think the cause of death is?
It's too early to tell, and we're not going to second guess the lab and the medical examiner.
There are no obvious signs on the body?
Gentlemen, we have stayed back to let the crime lab people do their job. We only got close enough to give the tentative identification.
How long do you think he's been dead?
I can give no answer.
Can you give us some background to how the body was found?
No, I can't at this time. We received our call from Livonia stating a body had been found and that the clothing description was similar to that of our missing boy.
Was that about 11 o'clock?
Found there?
I received the call from the station at 11:30.
Do you know whether or not the Livonia Fire Department tried to revive the body when they found it?
I do not.
Is it true a red jacket and skateboard was found with the body?
In fact, I know I saw the red jacket and the green pants and the shoes. All tentative identification is there.
What about signs of violence on the body? Does it look like anything like stabbing, shooting, anything like that?
No open signs that we could see from our position in the middle of the road.
Can you tell us why the Sheriff's Department has this area blocked off?
So people can work.
Are they checking license numbers and cars thoroughly to see perhaps if there's a suspect in the area?
Gentlemen, we're doing a number of things that we can't release right at this time. I still feel the most important aspect is the investigation and get this animal off the street.
All 3 of his siblings remember me telling Tim that if anybody tried to pick him up, he should drop everything he had, run as fast as he could, and scream. And I'm convinced to this day that when Timmy was kidnapped, he knew what was going to happen to him. And as an 11-year-old kid, there was nothing he could do about it. And that's the aggravating part of the murder to me.
Barry and Marion had the wherewithal and courage to put on a press conference. Finally, on March 22nd, 5 or 6 days after Tim had gone missing. 2 kids are driving down Gill Road near 8 Mile in Farmington, and they see, I think they see Tim's red hockey jacket.
We're going to say that the body, the officer believed that there was still a chance, so he called the fire department there. They were unsuccessful.
Did they try to revive him?
We understand they did.
Why did you think the body might still be alive?
It was still warm.
So police performed CPR.
That involved Livonia police. So they had a bunch of detectives up in the task force too. You know, they thought, oh, they're going to solve this one. Well, I mean, Timmy King, when he was found, they thought he was still alive. They tried to resuscitate him, and they couldn't, so.
And Mary and Kathy were home, and there were neighbors over, and they were watching the Johnny Carson show. I think Barry had gone to sleep, or Barry was listening to the radio. And police had asked the media not to report anything until they were able to tell the Kings. And but then a small ticker headline went at the bottom of the TV, and it said a body has been found. So
I was in bed and had the radio on, and they said something about finding the body there, and I knew it had to be Tim. And it was verified shortly thereafter. My wife and some additional people were still awake and were here in the living room. And our family priest and one of the leading Birmingham police officers confirmed everything to us. But I was not surprised.
Police told me last night it was about 11 o'clock when 2 teenage boys from Detroit had driven down Gill Road. They'd gotten this far, about 200 yards south of 8 Mile Road. They spotted the body of Timothy King. They went to that house back there, another 200 yards, and told their story to Lester Davis.
Well, the cat was out at 10:30, about a half an hour before this whole thing occurred, and then the boys knocked on the door, and they said they saw the cat. I says, well, now, wait a minute, hang in there. And at that time of night, I wasn't about to let anybody in the house. It was, about 11 o'clock. The cat got out at 10 o'clock, and I didn't let him in. I said, well, you guys just hang in there. Went down there, and there it was. So that was it, and so I came back in the house.
Do you think the boy could have still been alive when he was dumped there?
Well, I don't know. I was up all night, and I'm not a doctor. I don't doubt anybody's word of what they say, but I did see the doctor lift his arm up. When I first went down there, the boy's arm was behind him. He was laying on his left cheek, and his body left side to the mud, which was more or less frozen at that time of night because of the cold weather. And then I noticed that the arm had been moved. And then I heard that the fire department had been there to check over to see if he was dead. And I will never doubt the word of a fireman. They know. These guys are our greatest. And they said he was dead, so he was. And I don't think the body had been there any more than an hour before the cat let the boys know that it was there, and they knocked on the door, and I called the police and all that so-called bit. It's one of those things. I answering your question, I don't know, but I take everybody's word for it. As I say, the Livonia police, after I called them, I didn't even get the flashlight hardly out of the drawer, and they were here just like snap, just like that. And they didn't fool around. They went right to the point, and that was it.
The autopsy was conducted by Dr. Spitz of the medical examiner's office in Wayne County. The overall results were that death occurred sometime between 6 and 8 p.m. yesterday. Sexual abuse did occur. Stomach contents were of food that was consumed about 2 hours before death.
The autopsy of Timothy King showed that he had had a chicken dinner shortly before he was murdered. The killer heard or read the comments by Mrs. King and made it a point to feed Tim his favorite meal before he was killed. In a macabre twist, almost adding to the injury and misery of the family.
Happens to you, it doesn't make any difference whether he's kidnapped and murdered or run over by a car on the way home. He's just not here anymore.
The parish priest, Don Stutt, Detective Jack Caldflesh, and another detective took Marion to the morgue to identify the body. That woman amazed me. She's just, by force of sheer will, she said, I've got 3 other kids to raise, and I'm not going to let this decimate the rest of their lives. But Chris said it wasn't like, we didn't talk about Tim. He was just, we celebrated him at Christmas and talked about his sense of humor and the fact that he loved to play hockey and Little League, but they didn't talk about the crimes.
Death was caused by suffocation. Basically, that's it.
Were there any bruises on the body?
There were some marks for binding of the hands and feet, yes.
Any indication that you've been gagged or anything like that? Anything around the mouth?
Only the suffocation aspect.
Was there any indication of what the contents of the stomach?
Yes, fowl and corn. Fowl. Chickens.
Turkey?
Or turkey,
You said there was evidence of binding of the hands and feet, is that correct?
Yes.
That now, when he was found, he was not found, is that correct?
No, he was not.
So this occurred sometime during his imprisonment term.
You could read the entire report to tell you that due to blood and such, they can tell before or after, and this was before.
Do you have any idea, any indication of whether he was murdered at the scene or somewhere else?
It's the doctor's opinion he was not murdered at the scene.
Was the body clean?
Yes,
Washed?
it was clean.
Chief, any indication of how the suffocation might have taken place? By hands or whatever?
Covering of the mouth, whether it was with a cloth or, I don't think he could say that either.
Was the cleansing of the body similar to that of the other children?
I guess I would have to pass that to the people who handled the previous 3. I was not involved in those 3.
Was the body dug in the ditch? Or was it laid there?
It appeared that it was laid there.
Was the body on its back or its head on?
Back side, partially on the side.
Were there fingerprints taken on the body? Did anything turn up?
All physical evidence is being run through the lab, and I cannot give you an answer to that at this point. I mean, we cannot. We just don't have the answer yet.
Can you tell us how long it is before it takes the body to cool?
Well, of course, outside temperature has something to do with it, but rigor and such, 2 to 4 hours. And it is still in the lab.
The bodies looked like they'd been cleaned and scrubbed and maybe even a shower. No, they weren't all cut up, not like the hillside kill out in California. These kids were relatively good condition.
Sheriff Spreen pointed out after Timothy King's discovery that the bodies were scrupulously clean. The police had revealed that publicly, and it was a mistake for the police to be revealing all this information, because then that would help the killer know what he had to do to get away with a future crime. All this was going on, and with the public being so fearful, the last thing they needed was to see quarreling police officers, but that's what they saw. And so now they were frightened about a killer, and they were frightened that the police were bungling this case.
I think the person that had the best take on it at the time was Warner Spitz, the medical examiner that did the autopsy on the fourth victim, Tim King. And he said, I wouldn't say so much that the suspect was meticulous, more so that the suspect took care enough to at least feed the victims, keep them somewhere that was warm and dry. They weren't laying in the dirt somewhere. And it got blown out of proportion over time, as being the kids were bathed and hair cut and washed and teeth brushed. And all. I mean, it just got out of hand. But I think it was more so the fact that Warner Spitz felt that the victims were relatively well cared for as far as exposure.
Well, we can keep processing these tips. And as I say, we need the phone call or the letter from the relative who tells us that they know that this person has kept a child, they realize that this is a killer, and they are going to turn the person over to us. And I think they have to know that we're going to act prudently and in a proper way in doing this. We realize that we have got to take this person off the streets, and I think they have to too.
When the two boys when there's evidence that they had been molested, that's when we thought that there could be two separate killers.
Chief Tobin reiterated at the news conference that someone out there knows this killer or killers, and he begs that the person come forward with information and put an end to this ordeal that has shaken the entire community.
I concluded in my own mind early on that there was strong likelihood that only one person was involved, because I thought if there were two people involved, one of them would ultimately talk.
On the composite that we've got up there on the board, this is a composite picture of a witness that we feel was the last person to see the missing boy in the Birmingham area. We're hoping that this witness will come forward, or anyone knowing this person will come forward and identify him to us so that we can interview him.
One by one, these kids disappeared, and we found them a week or so later. And we kept saying, well, all the kids, after the first couple were taken, we know the parents told their children, don't go with strangers, don't fall for the old ruse that your mother sent me, and that kind of, don't do that. And yet he continued to go willingly with who he may have been disguised as a priest, may have been disguised as a doctor, who knows.
If all four of these kids went with their captor willingly, police surmised that it had to be somebody they knew. That made everybody suspect. It could be your teacher, it could be your minister, it could be your priest, it could be your cop.
I can't imagine anybody doing what they're doing. And I can't imagine people not turning people in that do that. But I can't change society.
From what I understand from talking to detectives that worked the original investigation, there were guys that were upset that they had to follow a certain tip and not one that sounded better, and they would maybe bicker a little bit about who was getting the better tips. And that sort of thing, I guess, is common. I mean, all detectives want to do a good job, want to solve the case, and the reason we're in this business, I mean, we're somewhat competitive people. So, I mean, I think that would be normal. I'm not saying that it was overdone or it was crazy, the arguing or fighting or anything amongst the task force, but there's rumors of that kind of stuff happening, and I think that's normal course of business.
What contributed to the fact that the body was not left in Oakland County, but instead in Livonia?
I'm certain that the responsible person knew that we were aggressively working, and he certainly, with the amount of coverage that we had to know that we had assembled probably the largest task force in the United States to work on a case like this. And I'm sure that the pressure caused him to move to Wayne County.
Did this follow the same pattern of the other 6?
It followed a pattern of other crimes that we've had.
Do you want to make a statement about that now?
No, I think we would rather evaluate that in the morning with the task force officers. I'll know better when we've made a crime scene evaluation. So, can't think of anything else to say.
Where do you go from here? What do you do now?
Well, you gear up, as I say, you gear up to look for the person responsible as opposed the other way. It's a different strategy, different investigative techniques are employed. It's much more aggressive from now on. And as I say, there's a different motivation driving the officers at this point. You know, I can guarantee the public that there are going to be a lot of policemen out there shaking the bushes. And I hope we come up with a person, because if not, I think we're going to be doing the same thing, you know, in a matter of months all over again.
It seems like every time I get one piece of information, it raises 2 more questions. And I think the prosecutors are elected to protect the victims. I trusted the police and the prosecutor to do the right thing by me.
I completely understand what Barry would like. I get that. As a father, I would want the same thing. And I know Brooks Patterson made a statement to the media a year or 2 ago. He said that if I was the Oakland County prosecutor right now, I'd bring Mr. King in and open the files up on a table and let him look at everything. And that's because Brooks Patterson has compassion for these families. That's probably part of what Barry's getting at. But, you know, it's an ongoing investigation, and we are going to keep the Kings and all the other families informed the best we can for right now.
Yeah, I hope it's solved for his sake. Somebody can go and tell him. And I hope that person is Corey Williams.
I hold out hope that either through technology or through interviews or a tip that it's gonna get put together, and these poor families are gonna finally have some resolution.
One more thing that's not part of this whole case, but if you ever have a tragedy like this in your family, don't forget about it for decades. 2 of my children, after 2007, told me they were under mental observations for more than a decade. Never talked to us about it, I think partially because Marion wouldn't allow any of this talk at the house. But children that age can't make lifetime decisions. that ever happened in your family, talk about it for a couple decades.
Thank you, Harry.
If silence has been the rule on anything in the police files, I want it eliminated.